your battles over how you are treated in Parliament as a mum, with the Speaker to start with. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a very simple principle for me. When we know that thousands of women still experience maternity discrimination in this country, the place that makes the laws on this should at least act like they matter as well. Otherwise, we're sending a message to employers that it doesn't really matter and there's no consequence. And yet Parliament wouldn't offer me proper maternity cover. So with my first child, I appointed somebody in spite of them. My second child, they saw me coming. They refused to let me do that. So I've had to take my son into all sorts of meetings. I've had to have him with me to make sure that I don't shortchange my constituents. Now, my constituency Walthamstow, call it God's own country. I think it's the best place in the world. They're brilliant people, but they deserve a voice, especially during a pandemic, especially when they're facing all sorts of challenges with the cost of living crisis. But the day that I gave birth, we had meetings with the minister where I was high on morphine because I'd just given birth. But we had people who had family members in Afghanistan. And I couldn't say to them in a life or death situation, I'm really sorry, there's nobody else to cover this role. So there's nobody else to raise your family's concerns. So I took part in those meetings, just hoping that my son would be quiet enough to be able to get a word in edgeways with the ministers. That isn't an acceptable position in the 21st century. The thing that makes me really sad is that the leadership in the Commons has been particularly dismissive of the importance of this. And yet the Good Parliament project shows us we might be getting some women into politics, but on the whole, they're older or they're childless. And the reason why they're older is that the barriers that exist to being able to combine being a good parent with being a good MP particularly hit women. So men still go into politics, but women don't. Changing that would help us open a whole new range of brilliantly talented people who the only issue is they've got kids, but who can make a real contribution in our politics. And, you know, let's face it, at the moment, Parliament really does need to change. So I think sending in the mums could be one way of doing it.
The leadership in Parliament, they have not been provided the leadership that you want, that you think could transform it and make...
I think one of the things I found particularly frustrating was that the leadership in Parliament, people like the speakers, went on TV and tried to shame my family for how we were organising ourselves. My partner works incredibly hard, but he can't breastfeed a baby, and that's what I was trying to do at the same time. And obviously your right to breastfeed is a protected thing unless you're a politician. And my challenge with that is I'm not asking for special treatment, but I'm asking for Parliament to set a standard. And as we know, standards in politics right now are a hot topic for other employers. So when the leader of the House basically dismissed the idea that it was important to make sure that I could do that for my son and that there was proper maternity cover for me, and the parliamentary authorities told me that it was a problem and that I shouldn't have legal representation when I was talking to them about my rights as a mum, well, what message does that send? You know, I spend all my time talking to my constituents saying, you have rights, let me speak up for them, let me help you with them. And if I didn't do it myself, what message does that send? So we really have to change this culture where we first of all try and shame women about how they are mums. And I know there were other mums in Parliament who had different opinions, and that's great. I'm not going to criticise any mum for how she wants to run her life. But we should be making it possible for all mums to be part of our political process and for all mums to be heard in every workplace, because right now that isn't the case. And if maternity discrimination takes place in Parliament, it's not hard to see why it takes place in workplaces across the country.